Hello and welcome to the EDRM Global Webinar Channel. My name is Mary Mack. I'm the EDRM CEO and Chief Legal Technologist. Today's webinar is a collaboration with our trusted partner, Purpose Legal, and the discussion is about revolutionizing document review with generative AI, present and future. Our faculty experts are Jeff Johnson and Dove Gold Medina. We welcome your questions and feedback in the console. They'll be answered either during the webinar or following the webinar. And this webinar will be available for replay at your convenience for the next quarter, as are all of our EDRM webinars. And we have some resources available for you.
I'm here, Mary.
All right, Kaylee Wallstead, EDRM's Chief Strategy Officer, is here with us, and she will share what resources are available today. Thanks, Kaylee.
Perfect. I have been so looking forward to this great discussion today with two industry experts, and we're loving our On24 platform with so many more ways for you, our audience, to engage. If you check out your console to the right of the screen, you'll see the question mark icon. This is where you can type in your questions for today's faculty, and we highly encourage you to do so. Slides will be made available after the webinar has concluded, and the paperclip icon is for related content. If you click on it, you'll see today's resources carefully curated just for you. You'll see the On24 engagement tools description for you to download to help you better engage with the platform. There's a link to learn more about EDRM's fantastic trusted partner, Purpose Legal, and their stellar suite of services. There's also a link to schedule a meeting with the experts at Purpose to learn more about them and how they can assist you. And then up next on EDRM's webinar channel tomorrow, an exciting Florida CLE event entitled, "My AI Did It," is no excuse for unethical or unprofessional conduct. Consideration of recent case law and ethics opinions with experts Ralph Losi and the Honorable Judge Ralph Artiglier, retired. Speaker bios can be clicked and popped up to learn more about today's faculty. And then just like Zoom, it's probably our favorite thing, you'll see the smiley face emoji. And if you click on it, you'll see many more emojis to react to the webinar. And we highly encourage you to engage with them. We're having a lot of fun with them on this platform. You can even give it a go now. And you'll see the Twitter bird for social media. You can follow EDRM and Purpose on LinkedIn. Back to you, Mary.
Thanks, Kaylee. And our faculty today, Dove Gold Medina, is a seasoned senior review manager at Purpose Legal, where he brings a robust combination of technical acumen and practical experience to the realm of managed reviews. Dove honed his experience as a review manager at Epic, where he tackled complex review projects and facilitated seamless collaboration across teams. His foundational years as an IT technician at Cox & Company equipped him with a keen understanding of technological intricacies, setting the stage for his subsequent accomplishments. Dove is a Reveal certified administrator, holding additional certifications as a data analyst and in reviews, as well as a relativity certified administrator. And with his multifaceted background, Dove stands at the intersection of technology and legal review, ensuring optimal outcomes for his clients. And Jeff Johnson. Jeff is the Chief Innovation Officer at Purpose Legal, has been a significant change agent in legal services and the technology industry. With over 20 years of experience harnessing the synergy of people and technology, Jeff has been pivotal in defining e-discovery, document review, and litigation consulting services. Jeff's leadership has empowered some of the world's most premier corporations and law firms to achieve substantial savings in enhanced efficiency in e-discovery. His expertise in the development of machine learning solutions, their practical application, and results validation within technology-assisted review processes sets a standard for how technology from classification algorithms to generative AI can be used responsibly and effectively in the pursuit of justice and corporate accountability. And without further ado, gentlemen, Jeff, please take it away.
Thank you, Mary. It's really hard in a bio to convey the passion I have and the excitement I have for the use of technology in efficient e-discovery review. It's been really the keystone of my career for a number of years now, working with analytics teams, large and small, on matters large and small, and within service providers and for law firms, large and small. Really excited to spend some time with Dove and you all today. With that, let me dive into talking a little bit about our agenda and offering a couple of disclaimers right off the bat. I've got 3 disclaimers for you. First, we are specifically addressing e-discovery review. There are lots of opportunities to apply AI and generative AI within the legal landscape. We are not trying to hit all of those. We're focused on e-discovery and e-discovery review today. Second, if anybody logged in expecting an in-depth explanation of how generative AI works, this isn't that webinar. We want to give a good practical understanding of how it works. I doubt if you're going to hear Dove or me trying to explain a transformer or embedding or encoding or any of that today. But we want to give you a higher level practical understanding of these technologies. Finally, these are quickly evolving topics. We'll share opinions based on what we know and how we advise our clients today. I fully expect that everyone won't necessarily agree with us. And as the offerings change, as pricing models change, our opinions and recommendations will certainly evolve along with that. With that out of the way, our agenda for today, again, practical explanation of what generative AI is, a mapping of that explanation to some of the solutions that are available for us today or will be in the coming months, as well as factors you should consider in determining how, if at all, you should consider using these tools today or preparing to use them as the months pass. We will try to keep some future-facing content throughout. Dove, as we dive in today, I want to take a few minutes just to talk about our branding of this webinar as Revolutionizing e-discovery AI.
Yes. So this graph that you're looking at talks about introduction of any technology, be it a microwave or a cell phone, or something like the VCR or the DVD player. And I mentioned the VCR and the DVD player specifically because the VCR was introduced in the late 70s, but it took over 12 years before it sort of reached what is on this graph as late majority. Over 70% of homes had a VHS VCR in them. Interestingly, the DVD player was introduced in the early 90s, and within 6 years, it hit that 70% mark. So some technologies have a faster uptake than others. And one of the things we're going to talk about here is how quickly Gen AI is going to have uptick. Some of the statistics you may see around will say that people are already using this at an extremely high level. There's a lot of implementation going on. We're not seeing people using it at those sort of late majority levels yet. At this point, it still looks like we're in an innovators phase where a small group of people are using it. A lot of people are testing it, and a lot of people are learning about it. So when we look at this model, again, we're in an innovator phase, and most of the information you'll see out there will put you somewhere in that early place. Our experience is the same, just anecdotally. We have a few clients who have used it in small phases of review, individual pieces, not for a full-blown, we're going to review everything soup to nuts with Gen AI. And I mention that because there is that FOMO out there. Gen AI is all over the place with advertising, with letting you know that it's out there. And we kind of wanted to let you know up front, not everyone has all of a sudden, like a switch, flipped over to using it. That said, the level of interest in it is a lot higher than what we saw, say, 10, 15 years ago when the early predictive coding TAR technologies came around. Those, it looked like it was going to be a slower uptick. Like I said, VCRs took over 10 years to get implemented. DVD went a lot faster. We really think Gen AI is going to be a faster uptick. One of the reasons being is that it's not as much of a purpose-built utility. Something like Cal, you don't use in your everyday life. Gen AI, people are using it to write letters, to write, all sorts of other documents, and Jeff's going to talk a little bit about the underlying technology, but people are seeing it outside of the e-discovery arena, and because they're seeing it in their daily lives, we really think it's going to drive adoption in e-discovery. So we do think this is going to be an evolution, but it is going to be a quick one. And Jeff, I'll turn over to you to kind of talk a little bit more about that.
Perfect. That's fantastic. Thanks, Dove. Just to follow up on a little bit of what you said, I 100% agree. We see a lot of surveys. Candidly, in my opinion, it's not really even worth sharing any of the specific numbers in those surveys. I could gather the impression from those, all published this year, by the way, that either 4% of my peers are using these technologies in all of their review, or maybe 43% from a survey I saw. I think it was about that earlier this week. Honestly, for a number of reasons, I don't think those numbers are particularly useful, or maybe not even intended to give the impression that everybody is using it. I candidly think it's even far lower than 4% of reviews are using this technology extensively, at least. I do think the surveys are useful in conveying trends. I think that for the surveys that publish the numbers from, this time versus 6 months ago versus 6 months before that, we definitely see what you said, Dove, that this technology is gaining interest and at least confidence that it will be part of this landscape a lot faster than some other technologies might have done before. So excited about it, but agree with you. We are still in that innovator phase. And candidly, after all my years in the industry, I think most of our legal teams like to be in that early majority, maybe even late majority, when it comes to adopting these new technologies full boat. With that, let me go ahead and jump into a conversation about Gen AI and the features that are available for us today. This landscape is evolving quickly. I think that 6 months from now, this presentation would probably be different than it is today. As of today, though, there's still a lot of, at least from an advertising perspective, a lot of smoke and mirrors and AI washing out there trying to take advantage of the AI popularity to drive interest in technologies. And that's really not a bad thing. I candidly think it'll probably help drive adoption of some technologies that I've been advocating for years. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Having said that, there are absolutely real implementations of these technologies. There are standalone review platforms that already have significant implementations of JI capabilities. For the most part, the standalone platforms that have a lot of these features embedded in them are not the major market share players. Those big players from a market share perspective in review platforms have all started to release their Gen AI capabilities, though. Those features are evolving. Most of them, candidly, are still in limited availability. That's not 100% true, but largely it is, with general release planned for later this year. As I think about Gen AI capabilities within eDiscovery, I think it's important to mention that it's not all the same. It's not just either we have Gen AI or we don't. We can think about these features. I put them in sort of three buckets, and that's useful at least for today. Either I can take a document and summarize it or interrogate it. I can take a document and get a review suggestion and maybe even do that as part of a mass operation to get review suggestions for many documents. I can possibly use Gen AI to interrogate and get key data out of many documents at the same time. And those are kind of the three buckets that we'll talk about today. Which tools you have available for you really depends on the review platforms that you have available or can have available. So determining whether or not it's time for you to start using Gen AI starts with what review platforms can you use? What features do they have already? And is that feature available to you specifically as opposed to some sort of limited release? I won't mention cost here. We're going to talk more about cost in a bit, but cost is part of that equation too, and can be a significant piece. With that, I want to spend a few minutes just talking about Gen AI, and I will ask, some of this is going to start off very simply. And my reason for, I will start off simply and then link it directly to those feature sets. And I just think that's a useful way to make sure we're all on the same page. I remember when LLMs first came out, and we were talking about Gen AI and people were trying to offer explanations of what they do. I heard it's just a very sophisticated autocomplete. And honestly, it took me a little bit to figure that out, just because it seems so much more sophisticated than what I see on my phone when I'm typing a sentence in a text message and it gives me some ideas about what the next words are. But if we start at that level and then work our way up, it really is interesting to see how they are the same thing. If you take that autocomplete example where you're typing on your phone, have a nice, and rephrase that as a question. If you think of it as you're actually providing some sort of an AI a question that says, I've just typed have a nice, what's the most likely next word that I'm going to want to type? And we can all remember our phone is throwing out day, night, weekend, whatever. So that's a really simplistic example. Now, if I move over to just run some of these in actual Chat GPT today, I can see that if I type that question, I'm not going to get a word or three words. I'm going to get an explanation of what maybe the likely most often used word is, and then some other words that might be in there, those other words that would have showed up in my autocomplete in my messaging app, and then an explanation of when you might use those. Now, that's cool. You can get a lot of context that might be helpful. Obviously, we all know all of this stuff, so this particular example isn't helpful other than for illustration. Moving on to the next example, what I'm illustrating here is if we offer some additional context and some restrictions about what we want the answer to be, ChatGPT changed its behavior. I'm no longer getting all of that stuff. It's taking the context I gave it and the requirement and giving us, in this case, I want a one-word answer. What's the right word to complete that sentence? Obviously, again, very simple, but illustrating here. And what I think is, this is prompt engineering. There are entire books and countless research studies about prompt engineering. For today, I think a couple of things are important. One, as we get into some of the eDiscovery examples, this concept of prompt engineering is often the or one of the biggest areas of secret sauce for the different technologies that we use. It seems minimal here, but this is important for the technology. And really, it's really just offering clarifications, possibly instructions, additional information for the LLM to use as it crafts correct and consistent responses. Moving on to actually transitioning into from that generic autocomplete function to something that we could see as a parallel to an actual e-discovery problem to solve. I do want to make a couple of disclaimers here right off the bat. I'm using this example is me using Retail GPT with a publicly available document, just a patent document. Just never do this with sensitive data, and always follow or confidential information, and always follow your organization's standards for doing this type of thing with ChatGPT. Beyond that, you'll see as we illustrate this that you probably wouldn't want to do this with ChatGPT natively anyway. Getting back to the secret sauce that I mentioned a minute ago. This is just a document summary. I've uploaded that publicly available patent file and said, give me a summary of what's in this patent. And ChatGPT gave me that. This is just an example. You can see that there might be useful within document review. There are already implementations of this where within your review panel, you can get a summary and possibly use that to confirm, hopefully not use that all by itself to make a review decision, but certainly could help confirm and help with that human decision process. There are some tools that are taking this capability and really custom fitting it to specific use cases, like deposition summaries, for example. I've seen some really cool demonstrations of tools out there that are developing this capability. Moving on to our next example. This is just perhaps a more specific example of document summarization, where I'm asking a specific question of Gen AI and it's giving an answer back. Who are the inventors of this patent? Gen AI is taking my question, it's taking the information I gave it with the patent, it's using everything it knows from its LLM about how patent files are constructed and where that author information might be, and giving me the information back. Dove, I'm just wondering, as we've talked about summarization here, do you have any thoughts on how useful this sort of implementation might be and where we might use it?
Yeah, document interrogation is something that is more than just responsiveness answer. It can help you find information that might take additional time or another pass through a document. Very often in e-discovery, we create things like privilege logs. And on a privilege log, we very often have to indicate who's the author of a document. So the same way there's a question, who are the inventors, you can ask, who's the author? Sometimes you've got a document that says right on it, by this person. Very often in e-discovery, you have to dig a little deeper. You might have to look at the metadata and see, oh, who's the author listed in the metadata? Sometimes that's correct. Very often we'll see the metadata indicate the author is the IT department or whoever installed whatever the word processing software is. But this sort of use case gives you more options. You can ask it, give me one answer, don't look at the metadata. You can, really get into some fun ways to answer questions with document interrogation. Doing Privlog is just one case. And, as Jeff said, there's a lot of interesting things you can do with this. And document interrogation really lets you quickly get information out of the document.
Cool, thanks, Dove. Moving on to our next example. I included it as a separate category, but really it's just sort of a very specialized use of document interrogation, document summarization. And this is where we might think about starting to use these technologies. And candidly, there are lots of POCs and lots of studies ongoing, a few published, about using Gen AI to conduct and automate document review. There are absolutely technologies providing this capability today. Using our little Chat GPT simplified illustration, I'm really just providing a prompt that is saying, here's the document, here's what we're looking for. Again, a very simplistic example. Is it relevant to that query? How confident are you? And then provide me with some rationale and decision for that confidence. And rationale for the decision and confidence. And we can see ChatGPT is telling me, yes, this document is relevant to your question. I happen to know that's the correct answer. So I'm pleased to see that it's confident that's the correct answer. And then it offers me rationale that seems appropriate. So you can imagine lots of implementations for this. And we will talk more during this call about how we could use these for first pass review, possibly second pass review. You could imagine looking at incoming productions with this tool, PII review, privilege review. All of these things are potentials. And there is reason, well, I'll talk more about that in a bit. All of these things are great if it works. So does it work? The question is really natively, it doesn't, at least not to a status that I would be happy with. This exact example, I ran it using ChatGPT 20 times. And of those 20 times, 12 times it did say it was relevant, 8 times it didn't. Every answer was it was 3 was the confidence score on every answer. And every rationale seemed very logical and explained why it was or wasn't relevant, depending on what it decided at that time. But that's not to say that Gen AI isn't useful and can't be accurate for document review. ChatGPT isn't a good source for it, but we already talked about reasons why you wouldn't use ChatGPT for this anyway. All of the production-ready implementations for this involve an additional layer of, I call it secret sauce, a lot of people do, around that prompt engineering that I talked about a minute ago. You're adding instructions, you're adding clarification, you're adding context through the prompt that will help this decision get responsive. Just as an example, one of our partners, I used their API to run this exact same test, and it got the correct relevant answer 100% of the time. So I was just illustrating the need for innovative design around these solutions. You can't just plug them in to an e-discovery platform and expect them to work at the level we need them to. AI has weaknesses. Let's go ahead and move on. With that, we're going to spend a minute here getting into probably the furthest in the weeds that we want to get in this presentation today. My reasoning for that is it's important. You might have heard people mention RAG or responsive or retrieval augmented generation. And we want to talk a little bit about what that means and why it's important. I'm talking about it here because it's incredibly relevant to that third bucket of features that I talked about, where everything we've talked about so far has been, I'm asking a question or asking for a summary about one specific document. Well, another really cool feature that we can use Gen AI for is I've got a population of documents or a search result with lots of documents in it, and I want to ask questions of all of those documents. Well, there are frankly technical and economical reasons why it's not going to make sense or even be possible to throw an entire document population into a prompt and throw it to the Gen AI large language model. It's just not something we can or should try to do at this point. That's where retrieval augmented generation comes in. Essentially, we're introducing a preliminary step where we take the user's question, turn it into a query, ask that query of a non-Gen AI data source, whether that's a text index, some sort of other analytics index, and identify key documents or key snippets of documents from within the larger population that we want to submit as part of that prompt. That's when the Gen AI would take over with that subset of the most relevant content and generate the answer that you need. So for a long time, the saying garbage in, garbage out has been common within analytics, and it certainly applies here. This is the differentiator, that query piece, and the design of retrieval augmented generation varies from tool to tool. And that, depending on any implementation of this, that will change the responses that come back, because it will change the input that the Gen AI gets. So this, even though some of these technologies might be the same, if I were to just, early on, I had discussions with teams around, this will be really easy. Gen AI is, we can just put a chat bot into our review platform and ask a question and get answers back. That's just really cool stuff. It seems cool. It is cool, but it seems really simple just based on that UI. But the difference between a well-designed, production-ready implementation of that kind of tool and one that is just a chatbot slapped into a review platform is dramatic. That's another area where the secret sauce that makes these tools work within our context is really relevant here in this piece. So I mentioned this because of this concept, we can have technology within the e-discovery review platform that lets us ask questions and get information across a search result, across the entire population. So it's a really cool value add, and you could imagine lots of scenarios where this is useful. I just saw a webinar yesterday from a technology provider that has some really cool features coming out around a very focused utilization of this kind of concept, where the user asks a question, the technology sort of expands that out into a bunch of questions, and comes back with a very nice presentation of key dates, key timelines, key entities. There's just a lot of cool stuff on the horizon for this particular implementation. With that, I think I'm going to dive into just some wrapping up of these features. So one thing I do want to mention, through all of these feature sets, hopefully none of it seemed like it was an easy button, everything happens automatically. Any reliance on these tools, the document summaries, trying to do a mass document review, interrogating a population of documents, the importance of the human in the loop to properly oversee and make sure the end result is good, even given all of the fantastic automation that's already available or soon will be available to us. This cannot be underestimated. It's absolutely necessary. And as we develop our workflows around this tool, every single use case deserves some thought about what's the risk if the answer isn't 100% correct, and what steps are we going to take to make sure that it is. And I recognize 100% correct in all those contexts is not a possibility. It just sort of came out of my mouth, but correct enough to accompany the risk level that accompanies any use case that we're talking about. Beyond the general summary, interrogation, and review capabilities, I think it's worth mentioning that there are differentiators within these tools. I've put them in just general buckets, but within those buckets, there are going to be different implementations of how those tools handle different languages, how they might handle or not handle image files, how they approach audio files. There is really cool ability to translate to and from languages, such that within an AI context, it's possible for me to submit a question in English that gets used against a document population that has a lot of Spanish or Chinese content in it, but that content gets considered and is part of the answer that comes back to me, and that answer still comes back to me in English. There's just some really cool capabilities there. Images, the same thing. I've seen some really fantastic approach to handwriting, and just really translating handwriting into text that can be used in these prompts and questions, as well as transcribing audio. and using that in the question and answer process. And then also a lot of the standalone platforms that have implemented a lot of the Gen AI capabilities, they've already integrated this in really innovative ways with other analytics and search features. So there's just a lot to consider as you're looking at these technologies, which one fits your use cases. Pricing is something worth spending a little bit of time talking about. For most of us, well, one, I should mention, a lot of the tools that are in even limited release now, soon to be general release, the pricing isn't really finalized yet. Some of them, we don't know what the pricing will be, even though we can already start to use and test them. So pricing is evolving just like the technology itself. A couple of aspects that are common in pricing this technology are worth thinking about. One, it's often expressed as documents, but it's really not a document price. Oftentimes there's a limit to how big the document can be. I don't mean to imply that that's 2 or 3 pages, and anything bigger than that is going to incur additional charge. But really, once you're talking about 10 or 20 pages, depending on the technology, it might be more. And again, it's expressed as tokens, but I'm using pages just as a general guideline. Some of them are maybe as much as 30 or 40 pages, but at some point, there's going to be a break where if the document exceeds that size, it's either not going to be processed or it will incur additional charges every time it's submitted to the Gen AI. Also, an important note is this is often not a one-time charge. So if I'm running a translation plugin, for example, and I'm paying for that, I translate a document, I pay for that translation, and then my translated text is sitting in Relativity. Everybody on my team can use it. Or I'm using some legacy tar technology, I pay to put the 100,000 documents in the population into that tar technology, and then I can sort of use that tar technology in lots of different ways without incurring additional fees. Oftentimes, this is very different. It could be the case that, depending on the technology, I submit a question, I ask Gen AI to summarize the document. I get a summarization back. Some of the tools will actually allow us to store it within the review platform so we could see that summarization. Others, if Dove logs in and asks a different question of that same document, the Gen AI is not going to typically use the summary that it created for me to answer Dove's question. It will likely incur another charge for that same document in order to answer Dove's question. If I'm using it for review, for example, and I decide I'm going to jump in, I've developed my prompts. We'll talk more about how that prompting works in a minute, but I submit 100,000 documents for review. I get my responsive designations back. I figure out there was something wrong with my prompt. I need to run it again. I'm going to pay again. So just something to keep in mind with pricing as we evaluate these tools. It is not an insignificant piece of considering whether or not to use these tools. With that, Dove, I think you want to talk a little bit more about how we implement these, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. So Jeff mentioned earlier on, you can look at whatever platforms you're using now. Most likely, almost all of them have some Gen AI tools that they're either developing or might already be available. There's also tools that are standalone, but that's a technology fit that you're going to need to really consider. Do you want to use the tool that is sort of an add-on to what you already have, or do you want to use a different tool? This is something that I think is going to change over time. A lot of the early implementations of predictive coding, you might have your review platform, but it didn't do the predictive coding. You had to export a population out, you did your training there, then you took a result that you then loaded back into your review platform for productions or for further steps. So some of the Gen AI looks like that now. Over time, more and more has gotten built into platforms. So the technology fit that you are looking at today is something you really need to consider, but it's also something you should consider is likely going to change over time. But definitely, you want to make sure before you implement something that it's going to work with your existing ecosystem. You also have to look at your workflow. There's a lot of phases to e-discovery. Are you looking to push Gen AI into your first level review, into your privilege review, and what can it do and where can you integrate it there? As Jeff said, people are being really creative. They are using it in ways that we may not normally be doing e-discovery now. They might be offering a shortcut. And those shortcuts can be very helpful, but you need to make sure that it's not going to upend your workflow. It's not going to cause any consternation, that your team is going to have a smooth transition to using Gen AI. And again, as we said, we're still early in this process. Right now is a really great time to test things out and to learn how it can work with your workflow. And you should be flexible. When you start out with it, you might envision one workflow. As you start using it, you may see, actually, it's not doing this the way I thought it was going to do. Let me try doing it slightly differently, and find a workflow that's going to fit for your team, so that you can, leverage this technology to help you in your process, which comes to the next piece, which is the cost. As Jeff said, right now the models are interesting and they are changing. So that's something you should talk about with your providers. Talk about the costs, but also don't be too surprised if 6 months down the road their cost structure changes. That's similarly something we saw with early implementations of other technologies, and something that we think may change here as well. Hopefully it's going to come down, because right now the costs we're seeing don't really offer the benefits that we expect from technology and that we really want for technology. So the cost is a real issue at this point in the implementation. Last piece that you never want to forget is responsible implementation. This is something that often gets covered, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. A lot of people worry a lot about security in the Gen AI models. Jeff talked about, you don't want to put anything that is sensitive into, say, ChatGPT's publicly available tools. The custom-built solutions, they will all explain to you why the security is not a major factor, and it really is not something you need to worry too much about. Talk to your IT teams, talk to your data solution folks to make sure that they are checking off all the boxes and that they are vetting it. But I've yet to see an implementation that kind of failed along the way. They've all done very, very robust security implementations. So, the bigger pieces to my mind are going to be making it work for your particular workflow, and making sure that it's not going to be prohibitively expensive, as some implementations look like they might be at this point. Which brings us to another piece of the cost, which is, it's not just running it, it's making sure that the answers you get are good. Jeff, I think he said that he misspoke when he said 100%, because we in e-discovery are not usually looking for 100% accuracy for any implementation, be it humans doing linear review, be it any TAR technology. We don't expect perfection. We always expect there to be some percentage of misses, be it overproductions or underproductions. Same thing with Gen AI. How do we ensure, though, that those misses are within our defensible, boundaries? The way we would supervise human reviewers, we're going to do QC, and there's lots of QC methodology out there. You could take a random sample. You can do very targeted searches. You could look at your search terms and say, hey, we've seen that of the 40 terms we used, 5 of them generate 90% of responsiveness hits. Let's look at anything that hit on one of those search terms but is tagged not responsive. Let's do a real targeted look, because those terms seem to be the key terms. You can do the same thing with Gen AI. You can go in and you can say, hey, we had a data population, we ran it, it coded this many documents, say responsive. Let's look at anything that is hitting on a key term that is tagged not responsive by the Gen AI. Why did it do that? And look at those to see if maybe you need to re-engineer the prompt or adjust it the same way you adjust human reviewers. How would we evaluate a TAR process? We have illusion samples, we have other tools that we use. that validate those processes, we can do the same thing with Gen AI. So we have a toolbox, and I don't think we necessarily need to reinvent the wheel here. So, we can even use both. I mean, I've seen that in various TAR contexts where you do an illusion sample and then do targeted searching on top of it. We can do that with the Gen AI. We can look at it. And one of the things Jeff talked about is, some of these implementations, they will generate a summary for you. So you can go and you can look at a document and say like, okay, well, the large language model said that this is a responsive document, and here's its explanation. And a lot of them will even have hyperlinks right in them. So you can click on a couple of words in that rationale and go to where in the document that rationale is, and you can look at the broader context. Did it get the context correct in marking this? Or if I go a paragraph up and a paragraph down, maybe it's pulling things out of context and it's a miss. Again, there's a lot of proof of context concepts out there that are suggesting these processes are good. They are hitting reasonable recall and precision, that it can be defensible, but you're going to want to check that yourself, obviously, because the same way you wouldn't just submit a brief from a first-year associate to the court without checking the citations, you're going to want to check the Gen AI system as well. We've all seen the situations where a Gen AI system hallucinated and got someone in trouble. That's what this checking process is. Are you going to QC 100% of the documents? No, because then you've gotten no value out of running the model. But you're going to want to check some percentage of them the same you would any other process to ensure that it is understanding your prompt and that the prompt's a good one, which comes back to much of what Jeff has said about the human element in this. That's really what you're checking. You're checking that the human element in this meshed well with the evaluation that the large language model did, and we got a good result. Jeff, did you have any thoughts about this before we move on? You're muted, Jeff.
I apologize for that. Thank you. Not a lot. I did appreciate that you actually hit on some things that I should have mentioned back when we were talking about RAG. Some of the components of that is the ability to request that the response you get back be limited to the additional context that the retrieval piece submitted to the process, as well as even citations to that content, which is where those hyperlinks might come from. So that's a concept I meant to hit on earlier. I'm glad that you covered it here, and I just wanted to hit on it a little bit more. But other than that, let's go ahead and move on to kind of just talk about generative AI in the context of TAR. I'll explain why that means both now and in the future, and not just legacy TAR. And I'll explain what I mean by that here in a minute. We kind of hit on this earlier. I really believe that we're sort of at a societal change relative to the trust and ability to feel good about using AI in our e-discovery workflows. And the reason for that is just from a general daily life perspective. I mean, I might be a little bit biased and unique just because of who I am and the people I associate with, but I mean, most people I know have ChatGPT on their phone, on their computer, and they're using it often. I was at a coffee shop with a friend just a couple of weeks ago talking about AI, and within a few minutes, just some random guy from the table next to us came up to show us how excited he was that he's been using ChatGPT on his phone and what he uses it for. I just think it's out there. It's in the air we breathe now in a way that legacy TAR never has been. And that's going to increase comfort. I think that, we might even squeeze some accelerated adoption up to whatever the adoption threshold is for those legacy TAR workflows. I've seen surveys saying that the adoption of TAR in 2023, just legacy TAR stuff, grew like 12%. I don't know how accurate that number is, But I think from a trend perspective, we just see that people are, maybe they want to use this and they come to us saying, look, we want to use AI because we're hearing a lot about how great it is. Well, there are reasons why you may not have available to you the Gen AI that you're seeing in the news, but here are these other features that you may have not wanted to use them 2 years ago or 5 years ago, but maybe you're more willing to use them now. So I think that some of that adoption will increase. I don't want to open a can of worms around family review, but I think that as people consider the possible use of Gen AI to do document review, it's generally not going to be doing family review. So can we maybe apply innovative processes to general legacy TAR workflows that might gain some efficiencies too? Again, I don't want to get too far into that can of worms today, but it's an interesting topic we could discuss that I think might come up as a result of this. Relative to Gen AI specifically, I do think it's important, at least for me. I have a very difficult time seeing Gen AI in a review process as anything other than TAR. TAR is really a workflow. The technology that drives the workflow can change. And, really, when we talk about using Gen AI to complete a review, that is TAR. Dove and I, when we started talking about this webinar, one of the things that Dove said is, whether or not we adopt this really depends on, is it costing us less? Is it giving us better results? Or is it giving us some other advantage that we can consider? And candidly, as you think about completing a review today, you might see some advantage in cost. Then again, you might not. It's not an obvious question for sure, or it's not an obvious answer for sure. Results, I think it's really too early for me to say your results are going to be better or worse. There are some studies that are starting to be published. We aren't ready to publish any of our own research. In what I'm seeing in the studies that have been published is that, again, the studies I've seen are single case results. They're not sort of, we've done a study on 30 cases, at least not recently, and gotten these results. I'm not talking about over the course of many projects, but on the studies that I have seen, it does look like there's the potential for the results to be better, better recall. Although generally TAR gives us good enough recall today. Over time, what I've seen so far, the precision in those results is not great, certainly not better, but with some additional prompt work, the precision could get better too. So those results might get better. Where I think I get really excited about it is I think there's the potential, and I don't know how far out this is, I don't think we're there today. There's the potential to be able in one pass to do a responsiveness review, a privilege review, generate the basis of a priv log, as well as document summaries all in one pass. And as we start to develop the ability to do more of that, then it's really going to be hard to question the value add and the cost savings with a process like that. Again, I don't think we're there yet, but it is interesting to think that we may be there in the future. With that, I will just mention, as I said, I think it's basically a TAR process. So the QC, I will illustrate that, early on, I think it was the first webinar that I attended where a solution provider was advocating for automating review with generative AI. This was well over a year ago. And he talked through the fantastic results. They presented it. It was and continues to be a tool that I think is very interesting. And I had asked, well, do you have any tests that you've run? How are you verifying recall and precision? And the answer to my question on the webinar was basically, or the way I heard it was, well, this is a different paradigm. You're getting a rationale for every document, and that precision recall paradigm is legacy TAR. We don't need to think that way anymore. I wholeheartedly disagree with that, and disagreed with it at the time. And honestly, I suspect that if I were to ask that same person that same question today, it would probably be a different answer. This is a crazy time. Lots of things are evolving. I don't necessarily hold anybody accountable for an answer on this topic from a year ago. But I think that all the testing we use to verify legacy TAR applications, legacy TAR workflows, they apply the same way here as far as I'm concerned, and we can develop the same statistics to demonstrate whether or not these tools are effective as we think they will be. I think we're running low on time, and that's serendipitous because I think we're ready to summarize it and work our way to the end here. I think at a high level, I think what we want to just convey is you're not missing out. 40% of your colleagues are not running generative AI or using generative AI tools on the majority of their projects. We're just not there yet. I think the adoption will be a lot faster than it has been in years past, and innovation is going to continue to drive prices down and utility and use cases up and more broad. So that being the case, I do think nothing in our presentation should sound like advice to, stick your head back into the sand and don't worry about using this technology. That's not our message at all. It just may or may not be the right time for you to do it today. And that's really a case-by-case, person-by-person, team-by-team evaluation. With that, Dove, anything to add?
Yeah, I think I said this earlier. I think the role for Gen AI right now is as a great place for you to learn about the technology. That is where we're seeing it in most places. And in some cases, people are saying like, well, let's test it and see how it does. And maybe the results are good and you actually use it in a production situation. But at this point, most folks are going in to test it and to learn about it. And like I said earlier as well, you're going to have to figure out how it fits into your workflow because it's a new tool. And the same way Cal workflows adjusted the way review happened, this is going to adjust the way review happens as well. So by all means, dip your toe in the water, don't put your head in the sand, but also don't feel left out.
Thanks, Dove. I've put up our contact information. I know Dove and I, either one of us, would be excited to talk with anybody. I know there are a few questions we had intended to save a little bit of time. We didn't. I also neglected to put on this slide, follow Purpose Legal on LinkedIn. I've got a sub-series of our blog where I talk about these concepts fairly regularly, and certainly would love to have all of you join me in that discussion and in future webinars. Mary, over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, we want to thank our trusted partner, Purpose Legal, for making you and Dove available for this educational and thought-provoking discussion, and our thanks to the EDRM community for your kind attention. If you enjoyed today's presentation, show Dove and Jeff some love. Check out the resources at the bottom of your console, find those emojis, and if you really loved it, don't forget to click the link to schedule a meeting with the experts at Purpose Legal. And we'll see you next time on the EDRM Global Webinar channel. Thank you.